Coming up on today's episode.
How does one go about improving their gut?
When you talk about gut health and developing that understanding of where your food comes from, then gut health becomes about sustainability and eco-conscious living and community upliftment. Essentially, these mindfulness or well-being practices originated in Africa. At the very core of it is an understanding that we need to be eating healthy.
Hello, and welcome to Colorful Layers, a space for colorful conversations to inspire a better you and me. My name is Motso Taje, and I'm a storyteller and a former radio broadcaster. Thank you so much for joining me in this space as I chat to some of the world's bright minds, strong voices, as well as experts around passion topics, as well as issues, and we may even attempt to unravel some of life's colorful layers. Today's episode is titled Why Understanding Gut Health Empowers Your Overall Well-Being. And yes, I know the words gut health sound very clinical. I did try to find an alternative with no luck, but trust me when I say that you want to stick around because my guest does such a brilliant job of breaking down and simplifying this concept. And she also does share some practical tools on how you can achieve or maybe even improve the health of your gut health. In today's episode, we are featuring Dr. Anesu. She is an experienced yoga and meditation teacher. She is a medical doctor and a proud founder and co-owner of the inclusive yoga studio and wellness center called The Nest Space. What I really admired and I appreciated in my interactions with her when we were preparing for the episode was that there's just like an ease about her. And I guess, in chatting to her a little bit more, I discovered it probably comes from all the work she has put in to find her purpose. She also has, a desire to achieve living and pursuing intentional and authentic living. I will admit, though, that I loved guzzling up all the knowledge that she had to share. It was as if her brain was a delightful frozen yogurt. But yeah, I'm not going to get weird. I hope you will enjoy today's episode as much as I did. Before we jump right into it, please don't forget to subscribe. Do follow us. Your comments and likes are also super welcome. So let's get right into it.
Maybe we can just take a moment for you to just introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from. And I think, just looking at your profile, it is so interesting. So I'm keen to know, how does a young Anesu start dreaming and then build this life or move in this direction that you've gone into?
Yeah. So I think, whenever I'm asked to introduce myself, it's always so hard because often we define ourselves according to what it is that we do. But really my life, I think, has been more about the things that I love and trying to incorporate as much of the things that I love into every single moment of my life. So following my bliss and chasing my bliss is kind of the motto that I think has guided me a lot on my journey. So I'm a medical doctor. That's always what I saw myself doing. I've always loved the human body. I've loved health and healing and interacting with patients. But after working as a doctor for a couple of years, I started to feel like I wasn't fulfilling the promise that I felt like I had made to my patients inherently by calling myself a doctor. I felt like I wasn't spending enough time really getting to know all of the different aspects of my patients' health, not just their physical well-being. And at that time, I had been practicing yoga for ages. I started off doing that when I was about 5 or 6. My mom took me with her to her yoga classes. So I had been practicing yoga for a while. And in med school, I decided to deepen my practice by doing a teacher training. And that's really where this understanding of purpose, intentional living, mindfulness, being present in your life, really, I think, took hold of me and my heart. And so when I felt like I wasn't able to tap into that in medicine, that's when I went on this path of searching for how I could create a space where I could interact with my students or with my clients in a more deeper, authentic way, but also a space where the clients that I did have felt like they could be fully themselves when it came to their healing and their healing journey. And that really is what took me, I went into corporate because I thought, okay, maybe corporate wellness is what I want to do. And I love corporate wellness, but I felt like I needed something else. I then started my business and worked as a preschool teacher while I was just getting the business off its legs, and absolutely loved that, playing, interacting with children, figuring out how health and well-being fits into children and childhood development. And then I started, working on my business full-time when the nest space was ready to support me and my lifestyle, but was also at a point where I needed to focus on it all the time. So it's been a crazy journey. We can throw Survivor in there. I'm now working out in the bush on a project to build a wellness center for this luxury game lodge. So I've had a lot of different adventures, but the main underlying thing for me was trying to find a way where I could feel blissful and present in my life, while also having a positive impact on the world around me and being the change that I wanted to see in the world around me as well.
Wow, that is so amazing. I think there's a lot of things that I'm taking away from what you're sharing, but also just that, things didn't come, it wasn't just ready made and you just went in that direction. There was a lot of work and sacrificing and whatnot so that you can get to this level. But what I'm interested in, you talk about, following your bliss. And I find that people that, speak like this, they always somehow have found a way to do something that they're really passionate about. And it not only, makes them happy, but it sustains them. Simple advice that you would give to somebody about following your bliss.
I think the main thing for me that I've learned over time is trusting in your own timing, but also allowing yourself to move at an easeful pace when it comes to building the life that you love. I mean, I think a lot of the time when people are feeling dissatisfied with their work or even in relationships, friendships, whatever it may be, often that dissatisfaction makes you want to have immediate gratification. So you want to make a change and experience the change right then and there. And for me, what was so important was being okay and savoring the journey of getting to where I wanted to be, recognizing that it was a journey, that it wasn't, my life wasn't going to change overnight, and that I had to enjoy the process of searching for my bliss without necessarily feeling blissful along the way. And that was really, an important lesson for me, because I think when you study this, particularly these careers like law or finance or medicine, there's almost this feeling of trying to finish and advance as quickly as possible, and that being related to how successful you are. So if you're a young specialist doctor in your 20s, somehow that's seen as you being more successful than someone who only specializes in their late 30s or 40s. And that's so counter everything that mindfulness and meditation and wellness teaches us, because it's all about following your own timing and being okay with the pace of your own life and your own journey. So that would be, I think, my main piece of advice is you'll generally know what it is you want to do. You'll have a vision of what you want your life to be like. And often the timing is very, very quick. You want it tomorrow. But it's really important to allow your life to create itself, allow yourself the time to create the life that you want, because then it is more sustainable, it is more in tune with you, and you're actually able to breathe and enjoy the journey along the way.
That's amazing. Enjoying the process, trusting the process, and enjoying the journey.
Yeah. And being okay with the ups and downs. A lot of the time, I think with spirituality and wellness, we just talk about the good things, the happy feelings, the gratitude, the affirmations. But there's a lot of shadow work, a lot of pain, trauma, and triggers that you have to go through along the way. And I think it's also being okay with that and recognizing that, if you are feeling depressed or anxious or doubtful or insecure, that's also part of the process of finding yourself. You have to find all of the parts of yourself and learn to love all of the parts of yourself if you're really wanting to be you authentically.
Powerful. So bringing you to yoga, when I think of yoga or my associations with yoga, there's always just around Eastern and Asian origins in terms of where it comes from and its influence. But I was reading some commentary that actually mentioned that yoga also has roots in Africa. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. As Africans, do you think that we take full advantage of this practice as things stand? Or do you think that there's still a bit of, a gap in knowledge?
Definitely still a gap in knowledge. I mean, if you look at yoga history, and this is something that I've really enjoyed delving into with our yoga teacher trainings at the Nest Space, because apart from, the daily yoga classes that we have with our teacher trainings, you really get to go into the knowledge and the history of the practice. And when we look back at mindfulness practices, and that's breath work, meditation, and mindful movement, be it yoga, tai chi, a lot of the origins of these practices stem from Africa. And probably the most far back that we can go is ancient Egypt or Kemet, where, it was written down in hieroglyphics. There are carvings on the pyramid walls and scriptures in ancient Egypt that talk about, they used to call it a mystery system. And it was essentially the school of thought that was reserved for the leaders of their communities, religious leaders, the scientists, the people who really were leading their civilization to new places would learn about this mystery system. And the first things that you would learn as a young scholar were about breath work, mastering the breath, how the breath works, how to meditate, how to still and control your mind, how to control your body through mindful movement or yoga. And a lot of the movements that they would use in this mystery system are exactly the yoga poses that we know today. And the understanding was that you needed to learn about how to harness and control your own energy, be it, the energy that you're using for exercise, or even just your emotional energy, generational trauma, or even previous lifetimes, the trauma of that and the energy of that. And through learning about how to control that and understand that, you were then ready to learn about the physical world around you and how you related to it through science, through mathematics, through astrology. And so all of this is there, it's science is now proving this to be true. But I think what's so interesting is, as Africans, when we talk about wellness and health and healing, it becomes a political and social justice conversation, because part of controlling us and colonizing us as Africans was stripping away our spirituality and the history of our spirituality. And so we are essentially told that we were scavengers, living in caves, doing rock paintings that were just about the animals around us. But when you take the time to really look at our lineage as Africans, we had intricate societies that were fundamentally built on connecting with self, connecting with spirit, and connecting with nature. And so yoga can be a really beautiful practice that, there's so much written about yoga now. Science is proving all of the mental and physical benefits of yoga. But even more importantly, I think as Africans, it's a new doorway to understanding who we truly are. If we trace back the practice, yes, to the East, but even before that, the people who migrated through the Indus Valley into India were Africans, the Dravidians, that's what history tells us. And so if you take yourself through the history of yoga, you eventually land right here in Africa. And it can be a really beautiful way of rediscovering our ancestors and ourselves through mindfulness practices.
I love it. And just discovering how powerful and knowledgeable we were.
Exactly, and still are. I think a lot of, if as an African, a lot of us resonate with something deeper, whether it's that feeling you get when you dance or when you listen to good music or when you gather in community. You know, that's what we're talking about, that spirit. And so we are so deeply connected to that inherently. But how we go about deepening that connection is what we've lost track of, because it's been taken away from us. And so I think that's why we're starting to see more and more African people talking about breath work, reclaiming meditation, reclaiming sound healing and movement and dance, because we recognize the magic that comes with these practices.
Beautiful. In trying to do just a little bit, gather a bit of information about you, an interview that you conducted, it said that Dr. Anesu is passionate about inclusivity, body positivity, and diversity in yoga and meditation. So can you maybe just break this down a little bit?
Yeah, so I think the way that yoga, and it's so nice that we started our conversation talking about the history of yoga, because that plays into it. Essentially, these mindfulness or well-being practices originated in Africa, and then as the human race migrated across to all of the different corners of the world, these spiritual practices migrated with them. And that's why, we see various pagan rituals being very similar to African indigenous knowledge systems and Native American rituals, all having a lot of similar links and similar understandings. But what happened in between then and now is that these spiritual practices were eventually reclaimed or taken away from the lineages that created them, because they were called barbaric or brutalistic, not based in science, and they were demonized often by mainstream religion, because these people didn't understand what these practices were, or they were afraid of the power that these practices gave the practitioners. And so what happened now is we see yoga coming back out of the woodwork, essentially in the 70s, where we had a lot of people from the West going to India, learning yoga, and then taking the practice back into the West, and then essentially reselling it as something new that they had discovered. And what that then led to was that being seen as kind of the boom of the distribution of yoga across the world. And essentially, it meant that when people first would hear about yoga or learn about yoga, they would hear about it in books that were written from the West, on YouTube, by Western teachers, on Instagram, by Western yogis doing all of these interesting poses. And for a lot of us, that was our first introduction to yoga. And so because of that, what you start to see is, because that is the only body or culture being represented in the yogic world, if you don't have a body that is slim, blonde, and fitted in Lululemon attire, you think that this practice isn't for you. You think that your body isn't able to do these things, or just inherently that you're an outsider to these practices. So for me, as a woman of color, I really didn't see myself in a lot of the yoga studios that I went to, on a lot of the yoga blogs or Instagram pages that I would browse through. I always felt like I was an outsider looking in, trying to get into this world. And so it was really when I started rediscovering the history of yoga that the idea of inclusive wellness became really important to me, because well-being is for everybody. We all want to be healthy. We all want to feel fulfilled, grounded, and at peace. And if you are somebody who's been othered in wellness spaces because of what you'd look like, because of the shape of your body, the color of your skin, the language you speak, even your physical body ability, for people in wheelchairs or the elderly, for example, also get excluded in these spaces. And so when we talk about real health and healing, we also need to remind ourselves that that's health and healing for every type of body, and that we need to be including everybody into this space if we really want to call ourselves healers, or if we really want to say that we are helping people to heal. And so that's really become another leg of my work. The Nest space, we are very proudly African. We talk about how we're an inclusive space because we want everybody to feel at home there. Because only when you feel like you can be your authentic self, you can wear what you want to wear, speak the language you want to speak, move your body how you want to move it, only then can you really tap into the deeper aspects of your healing, like your traumas and your triggers. If you go into a space to heal and you're wearing masks or trying to fit into this box that you don't really belong in, you aren't able to tap into those deeper layers of yourself, and you aren't able to fully heal. So these concepts of, human rights, social justice, inclusion, really go hand in hand with health and healing. And if you aren't speaking about those things as a health practitioner or as a healer, then you're probably spiritual bypassing, using spirituality to say, we're all the same deep down, we all have the same souls. Yep, that's true, but we all have lived experiences, ancestral trauma because of our cultures, our civilizations, and what they've been through. And so we have to have these conversations hand in hand with conversations about healing.
Which brings us to, I guess, our topic today, which is somewhat related to healing, because we're talking about gut health. I just want to find out from you, first and foremost, when you look at modern culture, there's quite a number of buzzwords or fads. And one could even say gut health is one of them. So I just want to know, is there really a genuine importance to this conversation? Or do you think that in a few years' time, this will just, pass on and we'll move on to something shinier? That's the first part of my question. And I guess secondly, are we having enough of this conversation, like, in your surroundings, people around you, in South Africa, as Africans, I guess, bring it back to that?
Yeah, I think, it's so interesting. Obviously, wellness has become a buzzword. It's super trendy to be talking about health and well-being nowadays. But, that makes complete sense, because if we think about how we navigate our existence as human beings, your existence starts with your body, with your physical body. If your physical body, as we know, thanks to COVID, if your physical body isn't well and isn't working optimally, then you aren't able to have optimal relationships. You're not able to work optimally. You're not able to live optimally. So understanding our bodies, how our bodies work, what they need to be at their best, really should be the first thing that we learn at school, in life. I think it's totally crazy that we are taught about the alphabet more than we are taught about the bones in our bodies and our organs and what our bodies do and how our organs work, because that's where, this is our home. So I think it's a double-edged sword with wellness, where we're seeing a lot of corporations, businesses, kind of capitalizing on wellness, making wellness expensive, making these offerings reserved for the privileged few. But one of the byproducts of that, or the side effects of that, is because it's trendy, more and more people are talking about it, and more people are becoming informed. And the wonderful thing about the human body is that everybody already has one. So you can't sell anybody a new body, as much as, we hear that all the time. Everybody has a body. Everybody knows knows how to breathe, knows how to eat, knows how to move generally. So when it comes to health and healing, even if you are being sold these supplements that cost R1 million or this new exercise machine, at the very core of it is an understanding that we need to be eating healthy, that we need to be making sure that we're moving our bodies, and that's beneficial for absolutely everybody. So not enough people are talking about gut health at the moment. I'm sure it's going to become more and more trendy, just like everything else in the wellness world. But gut health is extremely important. I think similar to the breath, if you think about the air that we breathe, the air that we breathe is one of the ways that we connect with the external world around us. We all share the same air. And so essentially when we breathe, we're connecting with one another in that way. But the second way that we interact with our physical surroundings is by the things that we put into our bodies, the things that we eat, and the things that we consume. And so when you think about gut health in terms of your connection with the world around you and how your body is interacting with the world around you, then it becomes a much bigger topic than just, oh, your nutrition, how many carbs are you having? Are you counting your calories? It almost becomes a philosophical conversation in its own right.
So just taking it back to the basics, right? Like you're just giving us like a basic understanding of what is the gut. And, when we're saying gut health, what do we mean?
So your gut is essentially your digestive tract. A lot of people, when they think about the gut, just think about the stomach, but you need to think about it all the way from your lips, essentially. So your gut is your digestive system, where your food travels from your external environment all the way through your body and then gets metabolized or used up within the body. Whatever is useful gets used, and whatever isn't useful gets excreted or let go. And so your gut is all the way from your lips, your mouth, the saliva that is produced in your mouth to help you digest your food. We already start digesting our food in our mouths. So saliva is not just to lubricate our food and make it easy to swallow, but the enzymes, the chemicals in our saliva actually start breaking down our food right as soon as it enters our mouths. We then have the throat where we swallow. We have an esophagus, which is essentially part of our digestive tube that leads towards our stomach. Our stomach then takes in all of our food and churns it, kind of blitzes it almost like a NutriBullet or like a smoothie maker, and breaks it down into easier building blocks for us to digest. And then from the stomach, there's a long, windy way through the intestines where all of the nutrition from our food is absorbed into our bodies, taken in our blood system to all of our cells. And that is essentially where we get our energy to move, to sleep, to think. And so when we talk about our gut, if we look at it as the pathway of how we get energy for the rest of our body to function, if your gut is not doing what it needs to do, that will inherently affect the entire rest of your body, because the rest of your body will not be getting the adequate energy it needs to do whatever that organ is responsible for. So gut health is extremely important, and it's not just what you eat, it's how you eat it. It's how you regard your food, the mood that you have when you're eating. And all of these things, I think, often get left out of the conversation when we talk about the gut, because we just talk about, nutritional value of the stuff that we eat and how our tummy feels when we eat the food that we eat. But it's so much broader than that.
You just opened my mind, because I've always just associated it, with just the gut area or the stomach area.
Yeah.
But my mind just went and just opened up. So I suppose this is where, the conversation then comes in, where people say that there's a connection, like with your gut to your immune system, your mind. I just want to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So when it comes to how our gut works, our bodies are these incredible machines that almost have different stations that are responsible for different things. So you have the brain, which is responsible for controlling the rest of our bodies, right? Our brains take in information through our senses, our eyes, our ears, through the sense of touch, and then they take that information and help us deal with it. They help us respond to whatever the information is telling us. But one of the interesting things about the brain is, because it controls the entire rest of our body, it has different feedback loops or different systems that help get feedback from the rest of the body. So one example would be, we have this part of the brain which is called our autonomic nervous system, right? And from the word autonomic, you can kind of guess that it's an automatic part of the brain. It's a part of the brain that we have no control over. And the role of the autonomic nervous system was essentially to keep us safe. It's our fight or flight center. It's the part of the brain that deals with our instincts. And so the way that this part of the brain works is, if our senses send a message to the brain to say that we're under threat, the autonomic nervous system sends all of these messages to various parts of our bodies to help us to deal with that threat, either by fighting it head on, by running away, by freezing and making ourselves inconspicuous, so maybe that threat doesn't even notice us. But it sends all of these messages to allow for our entire body to respond to the information that it's getting. And one of the places that it sends a message to is our gut, our digestive system. Because our digestive system takes up a lot of energy to digest our food. A lot of the sugars and the very nutrients that we get from our food is actually used to digest more of our food. And so because a lot of energy is spent on the gut, when we are under threat, our brains actually send a message to the gut to say, hold on, I actually don't need you to be digesting my food right now. Instead, I want all of that energy that you'd usually use for digestion to go to my muscles, to go to my heart, to go to my lungs, so that I can run faster, breathe faster, and deal with this threat head on. And one of the interesting things, and why I'm bringing this up here, is because the way that our minds have evolved is because we don't have physical threats in our environment nowadays. We don't have lions or, hurricanes trying to rip us out of our caves anymore. Our stresses and our threats nowadays are mainly psychological. It's traffic, it's feeling unsafe in your car, it's listening to the news or the radio, and that's what manifests as our stress. And our brain registers our stress as a threat, and so anytime that we are stressed, our brain switches off our gut to try to deal with our stress. And so when we talk about gut health, yes, we are talking about how your stomach churns your food, whether your food is passing through your intestinal system correctly, but we're also talking about your emotional well-being, because if you are constantly under threat mentally, emotionally, or psychologically, your gut is constantly going to be shut off because your brain is going to be directing its energy elsewhere. And so when we talk about gut health, that's where holistic health becomes so important, because you recognize that it's also about your emotional state, how you're dealing with your stress, then also dictates how you digest your food and how healthy your gut is. So it really ends up being this much bigger picture than just what food are you putting into your body.
It's actually making me think of somebody close to me who was recently going a bit of like a stressful situation in their life. And it started manifesting in bloating, constipation, and even I think like somewhat panic attacks, only to realize that like he thought something was wrong with his body or his stomach or whatever, only to realize that he actually needed to deal with the, emotional stresses that were happening in his life.
Totally. It's and the interesting thing, apart from that's just one link between our brain and our gut, right, in terms of our stress. But food and mindful eating can actually become a mindfulness exercise if you take the opportunity to not just chow through your food quickly and on the go, and you actually take the time to notice your jaw opening and closing. What does your tongue do while you're moving food around in your mouth? How does it actually feel when you swallow? Can you feel your food going all the way down into your belly? And if we use mindful eating as a moment of meditation, for example, you can then see how eating becomes a remedy for stress. Because instead of just emotional eating and overeating, you're actually using your gut and your digestive system to check you out of your stressful thoughts and to bring you into the present moment. So it ends up being, it's so wonderful. I kind of see the human body like a spider's web, where a lot of us kind of think of it as a box, right? We think it's got 4 corners, this many sides, it works all together. But actually, it's all interconnected. And when you start to see your body in that way, it becomes so much more, I think, easier to understand how you can make very simple steps towards feeling more healthy and more well overall.
And I suppose then that's where you find situations where somebody is unwell, and they find themselves having to go to like multiple doctors because now they're treating this section while the other one is treating that section, while everything is actually interconnected.
Totally. And that's why we're starting to see things like functional medicine or integrative medicine, holistic health coming to the forefront, because regardless of whether you specialize, we all learn about the basics of the human body in medical school. So your neurologist knows exactly how your gut works and how your heart works. They've just decided to focus on the brain. But if we instead go to doctors who choose to treat their patients as whole beings, not even just seeing your physical organs as being connected to one another, but also thinking about how you deal with your emotions, what role you play in your family, how your physical environment at home is. If we have doctors who see our health from that viewpoint, then you're much less likely going to need to pay thousands of rands on investigations and tests to try to figure out what the root cause of your issue is, because you'll have a doctor who understands all of the different parts of you and not just one specific part of your body.
So if I'm sitting here listening to this conversation and I'm trying to figure out which part of the spectrum do I sit, what does a healthy versus unhealthy gut look like?
That's such a good question. So essentially, your gut should feel like it's working automatically without you even needing to think about it. And that's the brilliant things about our bodies, is we're not supposed to have to worry about our heart beating or our tummy digesting our food. If it works well and if your body is at optimum health, that should be the last thing on your mind. So if you have a healthy gut, first of all, you should feel like when you eat and digest your food, you feel comfortable. So no bloating, no cramps, no heartburn or feeling like your food is coming back up again. And then when you excrete, the byproducts of your food, that should also feel comfortable and normal. You shouldn't have to feel like you're straining when you go to the bathroom, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you feel like you have a runny tummy all of the time. Or maybe you just feel like you can't get a rhythm going. You have no regular bowel movements. Sometimes you go to the bathroom 3 times in a day. Some days you don't go at all. So if your gut is working correctly, it's essentially like that saying things will work like clockwork. You won't have to think about your gut. You won't have to be distracted by your digestive system. It'll essentially do everything for you and you'll feel comfortable. And that usually looks, it kind of depends on everybody's individual body. That's also very important, is recognizing that we are individuals, and so our bodies work differently to each other. But you should feel like you have a healthy sense of hunger about 3 times a day, that once you eat your food, your hunger is completely satisfied. You feel like you can still go about your day-to-day tasks while your food is digesting. It doesn't make you feel more sluggish, doesn't make you feel anxious. You just feel like your tummy gets along with the job that it needs to do while you can focus on your other things. And that once you feel hungry again, you have the urge once again to eat and to do what it is that you need to do. So that's what I'd say a healthy gut looks like. You should be having regular bowel habits. Some people go once a day, some people go twice, but generally daily bowel habits. If you think about the fact that you're eating daily, you should also be excreting the food that you're eating daily, and just having a certain degree of comfort when it comes to how your body is working. And unhealthy, I think that's when, discomfort, I think, is a really good sign or symptom to always try to look out for in your life. If you're feeling uncomfortable, queasy, nauseous, bloated, heavy, or maybe on the other end of the spectrum, you always feel hungry, you always feel like your tank is running on empty, that's generally the sign that your gut health is not doing what it needs to do. Having an uncomfortable experience when you go to the bathroom, and that can be psychological as well. If you feel very self-conscious when you go to the bathroom, if it feels like a very embarrassing or stressful time, if you feel like you're having to strain when you go to the loo, and you're just feeling uncomfortable with having that experience of sitting on the toilet, then you're probably having some sort of issues, psychological or physical, when it comes to your gut health. And then beyond, your gut functioning, obviously, because our gut is about what it is that we're taking into our bodies and what we're storing in our bodies, if you're having issues with weight loss or weight gain, if you feel like you can't have balance with your weight, if you feel like your weight is always changing or it's uncontrollable, then that can also be a sign of there being an issue with your gut or with your relationship with your food, which is essentially gut health as well. And so if you're feeling uncomfortable in your body, I think that's the overarching symptom. If you're feeling a feeling of discomfort, whether it's your weight or whether it's when you're digesting your food, then that generally points to needing to do a bit more work with looking at your gut, looking at what is out of balance, and using, all of the various tools that I'm sure we're going to chat about just now to try to get a better sense of comfort when it comes to digesting your food and navigating in your body.
Very interesting. So in my personal experience, having navigated some of the unhealthy side of things that you just mentioned now, last year I came across the Gut Health MD, and he's got a book that's called Fiber Field, where he was introducing something. Well, he didn't introduce it, but it was my first time coming across it, the microbiome. And in his explanation, it just seems like this is the magic bean for optimum gut health if you feed it correctly. So I'm just interested to hear your thoughts of where do you think this fits in?
Yeah, so the microbiome is it's almost like the friend of the gut, the best friend of the gut, where if you think about your digestive system as a tube that's trying to get things from point A to point B, so it needs those things it's trying to transport to be able to move as smoothly as is possible. But apart from moving your food from your mouth all the way through your tract and down into the toilet, your gut also needs to digest your food. It needs to break down your food into smaller building blocks that it can absorb and that can be transported into the rest of your system. So the gut is quite good at doing this on its own, right? We have various muscles around the tubes of our gut that squeeze, almost like a caterpillar. It squeezes your food through the digestive tract and moves it along. We've also got enzymes that our gut produces that break down our food into smaller building blocks. But it could always do with a bit of help because we're putting so many different things into our gut. If you think about the range of food that you're eating, we have fruit, we have grains, we have leaves, we have spices. So there's a lot of stuff that our body is having to break down and move through our gut. So any helper is useful. And the microbiome is essentially a group of bacteria, healthy bacteria, that we develop in our gut all the way when we are newborns and we're either breastfeeding, or if you're being bottle fed, you'll still ingest some of those. We call them probiotics, bacteria, if you want to put it that way, positive bacteria. And that's why breastfeeding is so important, because we actually get these healthy bacteria from our mother's breast milk when we breastfeed. But we start accumulating all of these positive bacteria through the food that we eat, through the water that we drink, through interacting with various people. We absorb it into our gut. And those bacteria stay in our gut and help our gut to function. So some of these bacteria break down the food. They actually feast on it themselves and keep themselves going by eating some of our food, but also breaking it down for our bodies. Some of these bacteria actually help to soothe the tubes of our digestive system and make them more mobile, more lubricated to pass through. And so the microbiome is a great helper for our digestive system. And there are ways that we can support our microbiome by adding more healthy bacteria into our gut through probiotics or fermented foods. But we can also hurt our microbiome through antibiotics and medication that kills the systems. So a lot of these different things are quite useful with the microbiome. The best way to think about it is just your gut's little helper. And we can do a lot to support our microbiome through eating foods that have those healthy bacteria, things like kombucha, sauerkraut, fermented foods generally. And, again, when we go back to African indigenous knowledge, then it makes sense that we have things like maheu or, nkomboti, or in Ethiopian culture, they have injera, which is that fermented bread that they have with all of their food. So in African culture, fermented food is a big part of our traditional diets.
Yeah, and I just love that you brought it back to that in terms of like our African indigenous food, or just even, our cultural food, because a lot of the time, when you have these conversations, your mind just sparks, like, for instance, walking into these health stores and, yes. Just buying a bottle of kombucha, it's like 40 Rand, but we have these things. Our grandparents used to make them, and we can also do that.
Absolutely. If generally meat is reserved for special occasions, for rituals, weddings, sacrifice, and we're predominantly plant-based, it's more economical. We're not, if we used to be herders and farmers, so we weren't killing our cattle every day so that we could have beef for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That was reserved for very special occasions. So when we talk about veganism, when we talk about being plant-based, when we talk about organic food, of course, if you're living in the rurals, you're not using pesticides, your chickens are free range, they're running all over the place. So a lot of these concepts are being sold to us as being new age and revolutionary and, stemming from the West, when actually the vegan diet, eating organic, making sure that seasonal eating, that's another one, farm to table food, all of these buzzwords are a way of life that we've known as Africans since the beginning. And it's about remembering when we go amakaya and things like that. Oh yeah, when I have maize meal, when I have pap, for example, that's a macronutrient that's very healthy. It makes more sense to have brown pap than it does to have white pap. And that's what most of our ancestors were having. So it's a really wonderful way of reconnecting, I think, with who we are as Africans, instead of thinking that it has to be expensive, Instagram-worthy food that in order for it to be healthy.
True. I was even talking to a friend of mine like a few days ago. I was like, when I think back of my gran who lives in Bloemfontein, she had chickens in the back of her yard, and then she had, morogo, cabbage, all planted, peaches, grapes.
Tomatoes. So there was,
yeah, and she wasn't living in like a farm or anything like that, but there was that sustainability in the way that she was living, and we've somehow moved away from that.
Yeah, and it's so empowering, and this again, gut health then just becomes even more of a philosophical conversation when you talk about ownership of food and ownership of food production, and how empowering it is to be able to understand and witness that you can make your own food, from a seed all the way up to having it on your plate. And that's something else that's been taken away from us. Now, we have kids who think that all food just comes from the supermarket. They have no idea that it started off in the soil and in the earth. So when you talk about gut health and also developing that understanding of where your food comes from, are the people who produce your food happy individuals? Are they well taken care of? Are there chemicals being added to your food? Then gut health becomes about sustainability and eco-conscious living and community upliftment as well. And then it just goes on and on and on, and then we'll end up talking forever.
Love it. So in our initial conversation and trying to understand what are the factors that could cause an unhealthy gut, you listed genetics as one, food, mental health, infections, and then you also said that there was like a miscellaneous category. Can you just quickly walk us through these?
So diseases have a lot of different root causes, right? So the first root cause that often your doctor should check for is asking you about your family, asking you about your parents, your grandparents. Was there anybody in your family that had cancer of the gut? Was there anyone in the family that you know would struggle to go to the bathroom? Maybe it's even, a little story that is told in your family about this gogo who would always struggle when she would go to the bathroom, those kinds of things. Because our genetics, obviously our DNA that we get passed on from our parents, affects how our bodies work. You are much more likely to be at risk of having gut-related issues than somebody whose parents or grandparents didn't. And then, obviously, because I love the holistic health kind of standpoint, you can link that to generational trauma, and how just as various emotional patterns or relational patterns repeat themselves through various generations and are passed down from one to the other, so too are physical illnesses passed down from one person to the other. And when we become aware of the fact that that's a trend in our families, we then have the agency to break the chain or break the pattern. So genetic issues with the gut is a very good place to start. And the best way is obviously ask your family, understand where you come from and the things that your family might have been struggling with for a couple of generations. The second one that often causes disease with the gut is quite logical, and that's whatever you're putting into your gut. So if your diet or your nutrition is full of processed foods, full of chemicals and preservatives, pesticides, for example, all of those chemicals that go into making that food get taken in and absorbed by your gut, because your gut can't really differentiate between, this is the sugar from my orange versus, this is an artificial sweetener that's been added in. So your body will absorb both of those things in the same way. And obviously those chemicals will have a different effect compared to the natural chemical that your body is used to having. So nutrition mainly is around, processed foods and chemicals. Those cause a lot of issues to our gut, but also the proportions of what we're eating. Are we having too much sugar? Are we having too much salt? Too much chili, for example? And so obviously everything in moderation, everything in balance. Balance is the law of the universe. It's also the law of our bodies. So there's nothing that's terribly wrong. You don't have to cut out all of the sugar from your diet, but make sure that it's balanced and that you're not taking in too much of anything. So that's genetic. We've spoken about nutritional and diet, the things that we take in. And then infections. And this one is becoming, unfortunately, something that we need to be more aware of as South Africans, because our water is not quality that it should be. But water and water quality is super important, because the water that we drink often contains a variety of chemicals and sometimes a variety of bacteria in it. And some of those bacteria our bodies can handle. We know how to handle it. And other bacteria or infections our bodies have no idea how to handle, and they can make us sick. So if you have water that isn't of a good quality, you start getting issues like cholera, typhoid, which cause disease within your gut. And also some of our food, if you're eating meat that isn't of a good standard, you can ingest parasites, tapeworm and things like that from the food that you're eating that end up disrupting with your gut as well. So it ends up being, and this is why it's so important to go to a doctor who has a broader viewpoint of health when they're trying to figure out what it is that's wrong with you. Because a lot of doctors might just say, you need to go for this test or this investigation, without asking you, hey, did you go to travel to India in the past 2 weeks? Did you drink the tap water there maybe? Or did you have a wedding maybe these past 2 weeks where you were just eating lots and lots of wedding cake, and maybe that's what's making you uncomfortable? And that's where, the joy of medicine comes in, of trying to figure out what exactly the cause is. All
All right. So, how does one go about in healing their gut? Or maybe they realize that I've been living this sort of life and it's not necessarily helping me. So, how do I go about improving this part of my body?
I think the first place to start is become aware. You first need to recognize whether your gut is in balance or out of balance. And we spoke about how establishing whether you're in a state of comfort is often the best place to start. So take some time to really observe your eating habits and how your gut is working. When you eat, are you sitting down? Are you focusing on your phone or watching TV? Or are you really present with the flavors in your food, chewing and noticing the textures of what it is that you're eating? If you are being present with your food, you're probably also going to think about where your food comes from a lot more. You're probably going to think about the hands that prepared the food or that picked that tomato to bring it onto your plate. And so, again, the more aware you become, the more mindful you become, the more you're able to notice when things are out of balance. If you're aware of what you're eating, you'll probably be able to tell this is a bit too sweet, or this is a bit too salty, this is too spicy. I don't have enough vegetables on my plate right now because I'm actually looking at my plate and the colors that are on it. So start off with becoming more mindful of your eating habits, how often it is that you're eating, how quickly you eat. Are you scoffing it all down, or are you really taking it bite by bite to really digest your food? And then after your eating habits, notice how you feel after eating. Do you get the itis? Do you get tired? Do you feel drained after eating? Or do you feel energized? And that's how we're supposed to feel. We're supposed to feel like we get a rush of energy from our food. We're supposed to feel ready for whatever's coming next. After recognizing how you feel after you eat, recognizing your bowel habits when you go to the bathroom. Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel like everything is happening normally when you sit on the loo? Does your bowel movement feel comfortable and natural? Psychologically, how do you feel when you sit on the toilet? Noticing your mood when you pass stool, for example. And then also noticing how regularly you go to the bathroom and taking the time to look into the toilet bowl after you've gone. That's also something that's a bit taboo that people don't talk about. But you want to look at your stool. You want to make sure, what's the consistency? Are there any strange things in there? You can actually see tapeworm. You can see worms if you have that. So you want to be inquisitive about what your body has produced in the toilet bowl. Make sure there's no blood there. Make sure that there's nothing strange that you can see. And all of these habits, if you think about them, are a lot to remember if you try to think of them as like a list of things to check off. But if you think about just living intentionally and not rushing through your life, taking each moment as it comes and being present with each moment of your life, that's essentially what this is. And once you take the time to observe all of these different signs and symptoms, you'll then be able to recognize, oh, I go to the bathroom way too often. Oh, my stool is way more runny than it should be. Oh, when I eat, I get heartburn afterwards because my food is too spicy. And that generally becomes then the inquiry of, okay, is this something that I can fix on my own by changing my diet or changing my routine? Or am I at the point where I need some external health? I need to go and visit my doctor and let them know all of the things that I've observed so they can tell me what to do. So intentional living, mindful living, really is the best place to start when it comes to health and well-being, and your gut is no different.
Yeah, really powerful information. I think one thing that you just opened my mind to so often, I think even in our culture, when you eat and then you get the itis, it's such a common thing. Whereas, you just highlighted that actually that's not what's supposed to happen. And I think when I come across most of my female friends, so many of them are struggling with, let's say, constipation, whereas it's become such a natural way of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it shouldn't be, right? Our bodies should be the last thing on our minds. They're specifically designed to work without you even thinking about it. Just like when we're not sick, when we don't have the flu, we breathe without even realizing that we're breathing. The same thing should happen with your gut. You should be able to go to the bathroom and it's like no extraordinary moment of your day. It's just you going about your business. So if it's not that, and you are having to take chronic stool softeners, or you know that when you go to the bathroom, that's your best time to go on Instagram because you're there for 30 minutes at a time, that's probably not normal. And it's scary sometimes to recognize that our bodies aren't working normally, but making that point of listening and looking and being present with your body is such a gift, because once you correct your body and bring it back into balance, it's such a relief. You realize how much effort you've been spending or energy you've been spending on something that you shouldn't even be thinking about.
And I suppose, Dr. Anesu, as somebody who runs a vegan cafe, is there a specific way of eating that you would say you would advocate for? Or, is there some sort of happy medium that people can find?
Yeah, I think for almost everybody, a majority plant-based diet is what we should be striving for, where your breakfast is mainly plant-based, you're not having too much dairy. Dairy is also not too great for the gut because there's these bacteria called lactobacilli, which sometimes our bodies don't agree with. So that's why we have people who are lactose intolerant and things like that. So dairy is not great for our gut. And so that's why a plant-based diet is good. Meat as well is quite hard for our bodies to digest, and it has a high level of unhealthy fats, which isn't good for us. So that's why we want to try and keep our meat content low. But that doesn't mean that everybody has to be vegan. You can have a plant-based breakfast, a plant-based lunch, and then have, a little bit of chicken or some fish for dinner. Or maybe you keep your red meat just for Friday evenings, and then for the rest of the week, you have majority plant-based food. I think a lot of the time when we talk about plant-based food and veganism, people just think about their plate, the normal plate that they would have, minus the meat, right? And that is not appetizing at all. Nobody just wants to eat some starch and some sides. So if you are, that's just not ideal. So if you are wanting to be more plant-based, or if you are wanting vegetables and plants to be the staple of your diet, it's about researching meals that are intentionally made to not have meat in them, or intentionally researching different ingredients that you usually wouldn't use, chickpeas, lentils, all of these legumes that we don't often have in meat-based meals because the meat is the protein. Find out and do your research, and then you come up with a diet that is specifically plant-based instead of just cutting out the meat of the current diet that you have. So that would be my main advice. Yeah. And I think another point to remember is a lot of us have low levels of iron, low levels of B12 that comes from meat. And some of us, our bodies are not suited to just run on a completely plant-based diet. So allow yourself to experiment with different diets, with different quantities of fish, of chicken, of meat. Try to cut it out and see how you feel. And then if you're a bit more intuitive with your diet and you focus more on what makes you feel good, what makes you feel like you have the most energy, what makes your skin glow, for example, that's usually what it is that your body is asking for you to eat, rather than just a prescribed diet that, you've heard is good because everyone's doing it.
That's really incredible advice. I think for me personally, I've always had this all or nothing mentality, and then I always end up crashing. But the way that you've just broken it down, it's giving me a lot of ideas and thinking.
Amazing. Yeah, you want, and we spoke a little bit about how you feel when you're eating. If you are feeling stressed, worried about the number of calories as you're putting that food in your mouth, the stress hormones that your brain is coursing through your body are kind of undoing all of the healthy benefits that plant-based meal might be causing. So you also want to feel happy about the food that you're eating. You want it to taste good. You want to feel excited to eat. And it's just about opening your mind a little bit to say, okay, maybe I'm not going to have, bacon for breakfast, and then I'm going to have meat for lunch and then a burger for dinner. Maybe I'll cut out the meat for breakfast and for lunch, and then I'll really enjoy it when I have it for dinner. And it's everything in moderation, everything in balance, I think.
Love it, love it, love it. So as we close, Dr. Anesu, this has been so incredible. I've really learned so much, and I think that whoever listens to this will definitely benefit. Are there any last words that you want to share as we wrap?
I think the main thing is just encouraging everybody who's listening to start to develop a curiosity and a love for your body. A lot of the time when we talk about health and well-being, it's almost like a chore or a routine or, something else that you're adding onto your plate. But rediscovering your body and how incredible your body is, this machine that, is really the only thing that you have with you for your entire life. It's such a gift to rediscover your body. And so I would really encourage anybody listening to do some research, find out about how your gut works, about how your heart works, but do it from a place of fun and curiosity of learning more about yourself, instead of seeing it as like, oh, I'm studying biology. I have to find out about this, or I have to find out about that. And that extends, I think, especially to us as people of color, and especially to us as women as well. Our bodies are objectified. We're often told that our bodies are for the means of men. And so rediscovering your body as your temple, as your safe home, your only true home throughout your lifetime is really such a beautiful practice. And it ends up becoming a spiritual practice of self-worth and self-love as well.
I love it. And if somebody wants to get a hold of you, where do we find you?
So you can find me on the socials at Dr. Anesu Mbizvo. That's my handle. My community's handle is at the Nest Space ZA. And I've also got a website. It's www.freedomyoga.org, where you can find a lot of the different interviews I've done or information about yoga and breathwork and all of the stuff that I do.
And all the amazing projects that people can participate in.
Yes, that's been a real. I think with at least my journey, I love sharing all of the stuff that I know. I love teaching; it's one of my joys. So, if anybody has questions, please pop them through. I'd love to, teach and set you on your own path of learning about your body.
And just like that, it is a wrap. I would like to say a big, big thank you to the incredible Dr. Anesu. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Please be sure to follow her on the socials. And another big thank you has to go out to you. Thank you so much for listening. I would like to take this moment to encourage you to hit that subscribe or follow button, and know that your thoughts, your comments are really welcome. Please do share them on what you thought of this episode. And feel free to also share suggestions for topics that you maybe like us to tackle in future episodes. If you are a brand or a business that would like to chat about collaborations, feel free to drop us an email, colorfullayerspodcast@gmail.com. Cheers for now. Bye.